Hashtag the outer delicate and soft willow beauty, the inner cold and decisive killing expert female lead plus the outer pure and pitiful innocent obedient, the inner black and ruthless revenge male lead. Hashtag face to face rebirth Shuangwen. Hashtag the Chu family has been in martial arts for generations, with 3 generations serving as generals. The daughter of the Chu family fights in battle. When the world was at peace, the crown prince begged to marry her. She wore the same wedding dress as the crown prince, but the Chu family was completely killed by the newly crowned crown prince. She was resentfully shot to death by a chaotic sword. But unexpectedly reborn at the age of 16. In this life, she tried to stay away from the court to protect her family, pretended to be weak, wiped tears and fainted. She was the best at it, but if those little people dared to harm her again, she would definitely seek revenge and investigate to the end. But her weak and unruly nature was seen through by the least prominent and least favored 7th prince in the corner of the palace. At first, Chu Xianyi pitied the situation of the 7th prince, but to his surprise, he was a deep black fox. The fiber storage device pretends to be weak and faints, but Wei Jin and Yan happen to open their arms. Wei Jin and Yan intertwined their fingers with the fiber storage device to determine the cause of their medical illness. Day by day Wei Jin Yan was injured, and the news echoed throughout the entire palace. Chu Xianyi rushed over upon hearing his breath and looked at the 2-centimeter wound on his finger, causing a sudden silence. Fiber storage instrument. Wei Jin Yan, you go down. Wei Jin Yan said, when a husband and wife stay together, there is no reason for him to go down. It's not appropriate, it's not appropriate. After speaking, Wei Jin and Yan hugged the storage fiber instrument tightly. Alas, the 7th prince is really a clingy fairy. Keywords of the novel. Princess Jiao is running for her life, and she is in the black section of the court without a pop-up window. Princess Jiao is running for her life, and she is in the black section of the court. Download the complete TXT collection. Princess Jiao is running for her life, and she is reading the latest chapter of the black section of the court. Chapter 1. Rebirth of the Jade Age. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Rebirth of the Jade Age. The sky was originally clear and sunny, but suddenly a dense black cloud gathered, black swallowed white and occupied the whole sky. There were 4 storms, several deafening lightning fell, and the sky suddenly hit heavy rainstorm. The blood in the courtyard of the Chu mansion flowed from the crack in the door to the street outside in a gust of wind and rain. According to the emperor's decree, the 7th prince privately raised secret soldiers with the intention of plotting power and usurping the throne. Chu Xianyi, as the general of Jingwei, was pierced by 10,000 arrows to protect the entire crown prince's safety, and all other members of the Chu family were also killed. Now, the 7th prince, a traitor, is still on the run. I am deeply saddened and want to give up. I hereby appoint Chu Xianyi as the Empress Jade and the General of Chu Lao as the Marquis of Wuwen, in order to show my merits and inform the world. The 7th prince. The 7th prince, who was not favored in his mother's womb and stayed in a cold palace for more than 20 years, was weak in health. Chu Xianyi, dressed in wedding attire, knelt on the ground, clenched her hands and blushed with disbelief on her face. She slowly stood up from the ground, looking at Chao Gonggong with a cold expression that made her want to kill him. What do you mean? Say it again. Chao Gonggong sneered and sneered, General Chu, you are a wise person who should know the emperor's intentions. You hold great power, and the Chu family army is loyal and obedient to you. Even if you take off your armor and devote yourself to the harem, it is still the biggest threat to the emperor. The emperor will give you a poisoned glass of wine and leave you with a whole body, drink it. It's better for us to go back early and hand it over to the emperor. Originally, from beginning to end, Chu Xianyi was a major concern in Wei Junlin's eyes, so he framed the 7th prince, who had received a lot of cold looks and had no background. This hypocritical edict was to cover up the dirty truth and stabilize the Chu family army. Before Chao Gonggong could finish writing the word die, Chu Xianyi suddenly pulled out a dagger from his sleeve, knocked off the wine glass he handed over, and pressed it against his neck. He sternly said, "Get lost. I want to see the emperor." Shuangwen lowered his eyes and glanced at the flickering dagger around his neck, but he was not at all afraid. He looked up at Chu Xianyi with contempt in his eyes, and then snorted coldly, "Humph. Then General Chu, don't blame us for being impolite. Someone take Chu Xianyi." Shuangwen gave an order, and a crowd of soldiers holding swords swarmed outside the door. Chu Xianyi looked at the unfamiliar faces and her heart tightened. Even the soldiers she brought with her to protect Wei Junlin were replaced. Chu Xianyi looked fiercely at Shuangwen, about to wipe his neck, but suddenly his whole body became weak. Shuangwen gently pushed her arm away from her neck, and the dagger slipped out of her hand, but she couldn't hold it. The fiber storage instrument couldn't help but chuckle. It turned out that the cup of tea just now was cartilage powder. She suddenly looked up at the group of soldiers surrounding her, dragging their soft bodies and trying to break out of the encirclement, but she was ultimately weak and outnumbered. A dense array of soldiers holding arrows suddenly appeared on the surrounding roof tiles. 10,000 arrows rushed towards her, and her body was instantly filled with arrows. This pain, mixed with hatred and despair, instantly shattered her internal organs, which was something that the fiber storage device had not experienced even after more than 10 years of heavy injuries. Blood and tears welled up in Chu Xianyi's eyes. She looked up at Wei Junlin not far away, with a haughty expression on her face. The maid beside her helped him hold an umbrella. Suddenly, she remembered Wei Junlin's promise to her. They rode horses and hunted together, stood at the top of the mountain, admired the beautiful scenery, tasted the delicious food in the world, and looked at each other with smiles in their eyes. Chu Xianyi couldn't help but roar with hatred in her eyes. Wei Junlin. The Chu family's army are all brave and resourceful, and they will never be deceived by you, this little person. They will definitely know the truth one day. Wei Junlin blinked his eyes, but there was no expression on his face. He raised one hand and the guard next to him handed him the bow and arrow. He took it and pulled the bow and arrow to its maximum length, aiming it at the heart of the fiber storage device with a whoosh. The sword passed through her heart and landed on the doorframe behind her. The fiber storage device collapsed in the pouring rain. The fiber storage device was awakened by a burst of hot noise, and she opened her eyes to look at the familiar gauze tent on top. Suddenly, squeak. It was the sound of opening the door. Shao. General. It's time to get up. If you don't get up again, it will be too late. The army is still waiting for you. And the crown prince you most want to see is coming soon. She turned her head over and looked at the person in front of her, who was her close maid Ji Nian. Suddenly, she sat up from the bed and looked at the living person in front of her with an incredulous expression. Ji Nian. No, everyone in the Chu family was killed by Wei Junlin. How could Ji Nian still be alive? How could I possibly still be alive? That heart-wrenching pain is clearly true. The fiber storage device reached under the pillow and pulled out the dagger that had been pressed against Shuangwen's neck before his death. Speaking of this dagger, it's strange. It was a masked young master who gave it to her. The person walked lightly and approached Chu Xianyi, but she didn't notice the person's presence at all. The person gave her this dagger as a birthday gift. Although it was small, it had an excellent hand feel and was very sharp. Chu Xianyi liked it very much. The young master's speech was quite witty, making the fiber storage instrument feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity. The fiber storage device deftly used a dagger to cut a wound on its own finger, causing pain. Did she even feel the pain? Is everything in front of me truly true? Is she reborn now? Rebirth. She had only read this word in an ancient book before, and at that time it was just a strange talk. She had nothing to do and read it, but she didn't expect that God had really given her a chance to do it again. Ji Nian was a bit scared when he saw her bleeding hand. General, what are you doing? How could you hurt yourself with a dagger? I'm going to get you a medicine box now. Ji Nian. Chu Xianyi stopped her, no problem. Your general, I have been seriously injured so many times and have been unharmed. What is this wound worth? Seriously injured. Ji Nian looked bewildered. General, when he was a child, he had skin injuries when competing with others. But why has General ever been seriously injured? I haven't been seriously injured before. Chu Xianyi was a bit surprised. She paused and asked, Ji Nian, how old am I now? Ji Nian was suddenly surprised. She raised her hand and attached the forehead of Chu Xianyi. General, didn't you get confused last night when you drank the wine gifted to you by the masked young master? General, you are 16 this year. The emperor just appointed you as the general of Jingwei yesterday, and asked you to lead 100,000 troops to retreat to the north of the desert today. She actually returned to the age of 16. Jade youth. Chu Xianyi lowered her eyes and carefully looked at her hands. Although she has been fond of wielding knives and guns since she was sensible, she also pays great attention to maintenance. Her hands are delicate and white, and there is no thin cocoon on her palms. Her delicate oval face is like a white jade, truly worthy of being called a beautiful woman in the city. But later on, she became a general of a country and fought outside for years to protect the country. Without time to pay attention to maintenance, her hands became dark yellow and rough. If it were a thin gauze skirt fabric like cicada wings, she would surely scratch the fabric with her hands. Xianluo, Xianhua, can you help me check if Xianyi is awake? Don't miss the departure time again. Li Hua, the mother of Xianyi, looked worried. But she is not afraid that her daughter will miss the time to go on the expedition. She is just worried that once she becomes a general and goes to battle to kill the enemy, life and death will be unpredictable. However, her own daughter, like her older brother and father, enjoys wielding knives and guns, and is determined to be loyal to the king and serve the country. Is this the sound outside the mother and her younger siblings? With a thud in her heart, Chu Xianyi pushed open the door and ran frantically towards the door. She saw a living mother and two 6-year-old men and women standing in front of her, and her eyes suddenly became wet. But as she looked up at her mother's back, her expression suddenly turned cold. The crown prince, whom she hated to the bone, was rushing over. The crown prince smiled and looked at her as usual, but Chu Xianyi could no longer make any waves with this bright smile. Her heart was only filled with resentment. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Strange Diseases. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Strange Diseases. The storage fiber instrument looked expressionlessly at Wei Junlin, who was about to come, and shouted, Ji Nian, come over. Ji Nian walked forward. The fiber storage instrument said to Ji Nian in a voice that only two people could hear, Ji Nian, no matter what I say later, just remain silent and don't speak. Also, in the future, it will be the same as before. Call me Mississippi. Although Ji Nian was puzzled as to why Miss had to behave like this, he always listened to Miss's words the most and obediently followed her. Yes, Mississippi. As soon as Xianhua and Xianhua saw the fiber storage device, the two small meatballs clung to her body. They each hugged her thighs tightly, tilted their heads back, and blinked at the device. The fiber storage instrument lowered its eyes and touched their heads, smiled and said softly, Xianluo, Xianhua, be good, you go and play on the side. Chu Xianyi looked up at Wei Junlin, who was about to come. Suddenly, he plopped and knelt down. He lowered his head, tears streaming down his face, and murmured with a trace of anger, Dian. Go down. Xianyi. Guilty. Please kneel before the emperor and grant Xianyi death penalty. Xianyi is suffering from a terminal illness, and her whole body is as strong as a willow. The doctor asserted that Xianyi is only half a month old and cannot lead 100,000 troops to attack Shabei. Upon hearing Chu Xianyi's words, Ji Nian widened his eyes. Ji Nian had been with the young lady all along and had never seen her summon a doctor recently. Why did he suffer from a terminal illness and assert that he would not live for half a month? Upon hearing that her daughter was suffering from a terminal illness, Li Hua's face turned pale and she quickly ran over, feeling excited. Xianyi, what are you talking about? Your voice is so soft and weak, don't scare your mother. Wei Junlin quickly helped the storage fiber instrument up and said in a soft voice, yes, fiber instrument, how could you be suffering from a terminal illness? The doctor must be a quack. I just need Dr. Zhang from the palace to diagnose you carefully. Wei Junlin glanced at the close attendant Pei Wu beside him and ordered, Pei Wu, hurry up and bring Dr. Zhang. Yes, Your Highness. Pei Wu respectfully replied, and quickly rode to the palace to invite Dr. Zhang. Wei Junlin saw Li Hua with a worried expression on his face and comforted him, Madam Chu, don't worry. It must be that the quack doctor's medical skills are not good. After Dr. Zhang diagnoses everything as safe and sound, I will definitely arrest and bring that quack doctor to justice. Wei Junlin, who seemed gentle and kind, suddenly made Chu Xianyi laugh in her heart. In her previous life, she was really foolish. How could His Royal Highness, who can win the favor of the Emperor, Empress Dowager, and many high-ranking officials in the court, and maintain the position of Crown Prince, be a pure-hearted person? But although the fiber storage instrument wished to strip him of his skin and cramp him, his position as Crown Prince was unshakable. Sooner or later, Wei Junlin would ascend to the position of the 9-5 Supreme Sovereigns. So what the fiber storage device needs to do in this life is to stay away from this scheming world with family members, each with 800 hearts and minds, cannibalism without spitting out bones, the demon imperial city piled up with pure white bones, and the greedy Wei Junlin. But the Chu family has been serving in the court for generations, loyal to the emperor. Chu Xianyi's elder brother died at the border 3 years ago, and his body was abducted. However, Chu Laojuan's army fell off the city wall and is still unconscious. It is not so easy to escape from this imperial city. Chu Xianyi and Wei Junlin will eventually meet in battle. And in this lifetime, she will hate Wei Junlin even more. Chu Xianyi suddenly frowned, spat out a large puddle of blood in her mouth, and then fainted on the ground. Ji Nian originally thought Chu Xianyi was just pretending to be sick, but Chu Xianyi's tragic scene really scared Ji Nian. Mississippi Miss, what's wrong with you? Li Hua's face turned pale from fear, and Wei Junlin quickly picked up the fiber storage device and placed her on the bedroom bed. Wei Junlin held the hand of the storage fiber instrument all along, and his gaze never left her for a moment. Dr. Zhang, with white hair all over his head, hurriedly came with Pei Wu. Pei Wu drove him all the way, and his old bone had been shaken by the horse, making him panting heavily. However, his medical skills were excellent, and the palace called him the immortal Zhang. Dr. Zhang used a silk scarf to diagnose the pulse of the fiber storage device. In no time, his expression suddenly changed and he was extremely frightened. Li Hua anxiously asked, Dr. Zhang, what's wrong with Xianyi? Zhang Tai let out a deep sigh, but hesitated to speak because Chu Xianyi, as the Grand General of Jingwei personally appointed by the Holy Emperor, wanted to lead 100,000 troops to attack Shabei. But now that Chu Xianyi is like this, how should he explain to the Holy Emperor? Wei Junlin looked at the expression on Dr. Zhang's face and felt uneasy. He frowned and asked Dr. Zhang, why don't you just say something? General Chu. What's wrong with her? Wei Junlin deliberately added the term General Chu to warn Dr. Zhang to be cautious in his words and actions. Chu. General Chu. She was so nervous that even a thin sweat broke out on her forehead. In recent days, the cold wind has been severe, and heavy snow has been falling suddenly. General Chu accidentally contracted the wind cold, weakened his body, and caused vomiting blood. The more Dr. Zhang spoke, the quieter his voice became. Wei Junlin quickly interrupted him and said, "Dr. Zhang, hurry up and prescribe a prescription. I'll go get the medicinal herbs and have Ji Nian boil them. Take them for Xian Yi." Wei Junlin and Dr. Zhang walked out of the Chu family's door. Wei Junlin stopped and stared at Dr. Zhang, asking, "Dr. Zhang, what disease is Xian Yi suffering from?" Dr. Zhang's face was solemn. "General Chu, she has a rare and terminal disease called pitiful disease. The person who suffers from the disease is as strong as a willow, and often experiences symptoms of vomiting blood and fainting. Her life is as fragile as a willow, and it is fleeting. People who suffer from this disease should avoid getting cold, tired, and emotionally agitated. Most people can live for 3 months, while at least they can only live for 3 days." Wei Junlin was shocked and looked incredulous. "Impossible. Impossible. How could Xian Yi get such a strange disease? Zhang Tai, Xian Yi was fine a few days ago. Did you diagnose her wrong?" "Your Highness, I will never make a wrong diagnosis. The incubation period of this disease is very long, as short as 4 months, and as long as 10 years is not impossible. During this period, it will be no different from ordinary people. When it comes to illness, I will be powerless to recover. When I was young, I heard about this disease in the Shang dynasty, but no one knows the cause. However, the mysterious wizard's practice later made this disease disappear. Perhaps General Chu's illness is related to her visit to the Shang dynasty 2 years ago to search for her brother's body." Wei Junlin's eyes lit up and he said, "Go and hire that wizard to make the medicine for the Xian Yi." Dr. Zhang's face turned pale, and he hesitated before speaking, "Your Highness, when I was young, that wizard and I were already of the same age. I'm afraid I have already passed away, and I have never heard of that wizard having descendants or passing on all his skills to anyone, so." Wei Junlin furrowed his brows tightly, his face full of melancholy. "Is there no other way?" Dr. Zhang suddenly lifted the elderly eyelids that covered most of his eyes and said, "Perhaps one person may have a way." "Who?" "Seventh Prince," replied Dr. Zhang. Wei Junlin was very surprised and said, "7 younger brothers who have lived in the cold palace since childhood." Dr. Zhang paused for a moment and spoke confidently. The 7th prince's mother, Shuangwen, was from the Shang dynasty. Due to a strange illness, Master Wuchen of Fuguang Temple claimed that this illness was caused by a fetus in her womb, which is an ominous omen. The fetus in her womb cannot be left behind. The Holy Emperor remembered the past and beat Shuangwen into the cold palace, leaving Shuangwen alive. When entering the cold palace, Shuangwen was about to give birth. Later, when the 7th prince was just full moon and had a high fever at night, Shuangwen came to seek medicine from the old minister. When the old minister saw that Shuangwen was weak, he asked a few questions and found that Shuangwen had no different symptoms from pitiful disease, but at that time, it had been more than 30 years since wizards practiced in the Shang dynasty, and the old officials were powerless. They thought that Shuangwen's time was running out, but they never thought that Shuangwen would pass away until the 7th prince was 15 years old. The old minister speculates that Shuangwen must have been using mysterious drugs all along. Although this drug cannot completely cure it, it can definitely prolong life. Otherwise, the weakness during childbirth would be unbearable for Shuangwen, who has survived in the world for so many years. And the 7th prince and Shuangwen relied on each other for 15 years, knowing exactly what the medicine was. If the 7th prince could be invited, although it would not completely cure General Chu's illness, it would still ensure her life for more than 10 years without worry. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Jade soft and flower soft, I see sorrow and compassion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Jade soft and flower soft, I see sorrow and compassion. Wei Junlin pondered for a few seconds and said heavily, now that the war between Nanyuan Kingdom and Shabei is tense, Xian Yi's illness is closely related. I need to immediately inform my father, Dr. Zhang, and you and Pei Wu to bring the 7th prince to the Crown Prince's mansion on my behalf. Yes, I obey. Yes, I will comply. Dr. Zhang and Pei Wu responded in unison. Pei Wu was about to pick up Dr. Zhang and throw him onto his horse. Dr. Zhang immediately looked shocked and still had lingering palpitations about the bumpy journey he had just driven his horse to. Dr. Zhang quickly stopped the Crown Prince and said, Your Highness, wait for me. Wei Junlin stopped and turned around, puzzled, what's wrong? Dr. Zhang. Zhang Tai awkwardly glanced at Pei Wu and then pushed away the hand that Pei Wu was holding around his waist. He found it difficult to speak up and said, Your Highness, you and I both went to the palace together. Can you let me go with you in the same sedan chair? Pei Wu suddenly tugged at Dr. Zhang's waist again and said loudly, Dr. Zhang. General Chu is in danger, so why don't you ride a horse with me? I ride a horse very quickly, and I'll be at the palace gate with a whoosh. Dr. Zhang felt a sweat in his heart. It was only because of a swish that he dared not sit again. Zhang Tai quickly pushed away Pei Wu's hand and repeatedly refused, No, no, no. Pei Shuangwen, please spare me. I am already old and cannot withstand the turmoil. I am afraid I will die before I arrive at the palace gate. I am so tired that I cannot leave the cold palace. Isn't this even more delaying General Chu's illness? Wei Junlin was shocked for a moment, and Pei Wu glanced at the restless BMW behind him, feeling a bit embarrassed. Wei Junlin apologized and said, I was not thoughtful enough. Dr. Zhang, please follow me in the sedan chair, Pei Wu. You ride your horse and wait at the palace gate first. Yes, I will comply. Pei Wu jumped onto the horse and rode it with a swoosh, flying past Zhang Tai's back. Zhang Tai had just stepped onto the sedan chair when he was startled by the sudden horse wind behind him, causing him to sway and almost fall. Wei Junlin quickly reached out to help Zhang Tai. The fiber storage device opened its eyes and suddenly sat up from the bed, startling Ji Nian, who had always been timid. Oh my mother! Ji Nian calmed down and patted his chest, looking at Chu Xianyi, who was still a bit startled. Miss, why did you suddenly wake up? Well, no, miss, you finally woke up. Just now, Dr. Zhang came over and said that miss vomited blood due to a cold wind. His Highness the Crown Prince has gone to fetch medicine for you, but according to the time, it's time to get it now. Doubts about auspicious years. Chu Xianyi knew in her heart that Wei Junlin must have concealed his illness from Ji Nian and his mother in order to uphold the throne. The reason why Chu Xianyi took this dangerous move of falsely claiming to be terminally ill was because she asserted that the throne would never be held accountable to the Chu family for the sake of her father, Chu Ling, and siblings. Most importantly, there were also 100,000 Chu family soldiers. Where's the mother? Chu Xianyi asked Ji Nian. Just now, someone came to report that the new winter clothes purchased for the master have been delivered. Madam has personally gone to exchange them for the master. Chu Xianyi Jing sighed in his heart that if he could be reborn 3 years earlier, perhaps he could still save his father and brother. The fiber storage instrument tried to grip both hands, and its strength had recovered. The strange book I met in my previous life in the Shang dynasty was really useful. The strange book records. According to legend, 500 years ago, there was a mysterious tribe called the Tar tribe, consisting of only over 1,000 people. They possessed a mysterious ability to fix acupoints, and it is said that there was a most ruthless method of fixing acupoints that could cause instant death. However, to this day, no one knows whether this ability really existed. One of the more common acupoint fixing skills is called Weimu acupoint, which is said to have been invented by the Tar tribe for self-protection. The Tar tribe lives in deep mountains and forests, accompanied by insects, ants, tigers, and beasts. One of them is a giant beast called pterygium, which is brown in color and covered in blue mucus. It has 2 heads, no eyes on its head, 99 feet, and a tail of 360 inches. It has a red eye every inch on its tail and likes to eat strong and energetic living beings. The Tar people are generally strong and energetic, so in order to deal with pterygium, the Tar people invented the Wemu acupoint, making them think that they are a weak person on the brink of death, and pterygium will take a detour. However, pterygium is very cautious and will hover around this person for a while before leaving. After half an hour, the dangerous wood hole will automatically unlock. In the previous life of the storage fiber instrument, I accidentally heard the masked young master mention a terminal illness called Puliu disease. Suddenly, I realized that Puliu disease was extremely similar to this dangerous wooden hole. So, I used this similarity to make Dr. Zhang mistakenly believe that he had Puliu disease, which was as strong as cotton willows. The fiber storage device pondered for a moment. Ji Nian. Go and bring me the plain clothes I left at the bottom of the box, I want to enter the palace face saint. Ah. Ji Nian was shocked. Miss, you have already suffered from the cold and your complexion is not good. Would it be a bit inappropriate for you to go see the Holy One again? Chu Xianyi suddenly smiled and looked at Ji Nian, saying, Ji Nian, you have always been timid. If I lead a 100,000 strong army today, will you follow or not? Ji Nian gritted his teeth and said, of course I will follow you. Wherever Miss goes, I will go. As long as I can follow Miss, it's worth my death. I don't need you to die in this life. You're a young lady, I won't be a general anymore. I'll take you to act chivalrous and uphold justice. How about traveling around the world? In the auspicious year of the previous life, I went on an expedition with a fiber storage device and suffered a lot. Miss, really? Ji Nian, who usually enjoys reading martial arts novels the most, was overjoyed, but suddenly felt that Chu Xianyi's words were somewhat wrong. In this life, Miss, what does this mean? You don't need to know about this. Go and get my vegetarian clothes, I need to go to the palace face saint quickly. Okay, I'll go get it now. Ji Nian brought a plain outfit and suddenly discovered that the fiber storage device, which usually ties hair, had scattered its hair and inserted several jade hairpins. Ji Nian was very surprised and said, Miss, why did you suddenly lose your scent? Chu Xianyi paused and said, before, my mother used to say that tying hair was for girls who came out of the court to dress up. Before, I only thought tying hair was convenient and neat, but now I think what my mother said is reasonable. Now, I prefer to wear a head of black long hair, with a delicate and weak appearance. Chu Xianyi reached out his hand and gestured for Ji Nian to hand over the plain clothes. Chu Xianyi put on the plain clothes and Ji Nian looked at Chu Xianyi in the mirror in a daze, unable to help but exclaim, Jade is soft and flowers are soft. I see sorrow and pity, miss. You are really beautiful. In the future, when you get married to the crown prince will definitely treat you wholeheartedly and not look at other young ladies too much. With one heart for her. Chu Xianyi couldn't help but sneer in her heart. In the previous life, Wei Junlin was determined to kill her. Just as the fiber storage device was about to depart, there was suddenly restless noise coming from the west wing. The person living in the west wing is Chu Qi, the younger brother of General Chu's father and concubine. Chu Qi is a first-class lecherous and gambling person, but has a weak and life-saving personality. On the other hand, Chu Qi's wife, Wang Yu, is greedy for money and delicious food, has a fat figure of about 250 pounds, and is a paper tiger who bullies the weak and fears the hard. They have a daughter named Chu Yu, who is 1 year younger than Chu Xianyi. Chu Yu is determined to marry the crown prince Mu Yi Tianxia, but her status is low and the crown prince, who has high expectations, will not look up to her unless one day he discovers that she has practical value. Chu Qi owed a large debt due to gambling and was kicked out of the house, occupying the house. He had no choice but to shamelessly ask Chu Ling to take him in, and then he lived in the Chu mansion. Wang Yu sat leisurely on the bench, munching on melon seeds. The maid hurried over and whispered in Wang Yu's ear about the shocking news she had just heard. Wang Yu's eyebrows lit up with joy. What you said is absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Madam. I heard from the maid by air that she just heard it with her own ears. Then hurry up and follow me to see if the dead girl from the storage fiber instrument has already passed away. Wang Yu dragged his heavy body, unable to conceal his joy, and couldn't wait to leave. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Fiber storage device accepts a daughter over 200. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Fiber storage device accepts a daughter over 200 because of the death of the fiber storage device, leaving behind a woman named Li Hua and 2 children who didn't understand anything, as well as the unconscious General Chu. Wang Yu was one step closer to swallowing the Chu family mansion alone. At this moment, Chu Yu, dressed in dazzling attire, suddenly walked in from the door with a displeased expression on his face and said, "Mom. Where's that slutty girl from Bayer? Miss, Bayer should be looking for you right now, right? I just saw her in the garden." Wang Yu's maid Yun Er replied. Bayer is a close mate of Chu Yu. Chu Yu walked over and took Wang Yu's arm, gritting his teeth and saying, "Mom. That slutty girl Bayer remembered the wrong time. It made me oversleep and didn't even see the crown prince's brother. I'm waiting to see her. I'll definitely sell her to the Flower Blossom Tower." Womanlu is a famous brothel in the capital city. Wang Yu, however, laughed and his face flew wildly. "Oh my! My Yuer, please spare Bayer this time. Bayer has made great contributions this time." Wang Yu told Chu Yu about the matter of the storage fiber instrument. Chu Yu was in a good mood after hearing it, but the hazy face of Wei Junlin disappeared immediately. "Then let's go see her joke now. She always captures the soul of the crown prince's brother. Now she can only go to the underworld to be with ghosts." Wang Yu suddenly began a series of criticisms and said, "I mean, you can't just focus on the crown prince like a fool. You need to learn to keep an eye on him. It's not certain whether the crown prince will ascend to the throne in the future. You should also take a look at the third prince, who is at least legitimate. He was born to the former empress, and there are still 3 or 2 ministers in the court who lean towards him. There is also the fourth prince. He hunted and hit a rabbit, and immediately reported to the Holy Emperor. The fourth prince must be easily appreciated by the Holy Emperor. Also, the sixth prince, although he only loves to fight crickets all day, he may one day be able to compete with the crown prince and ascend to the throne. There are also 7. Wang Yu suddenly hesitated for a moment and pondered for a while. "Forget it, 7. It seems like there is no 7th prince in the palace." Chu Yu blinked and pondered for 3 seconds, feeling something was wrong. "Mom, there seems to be the 7th prince in the palace, right? I always feel like I've heard of the 7th prince somewhere." Yun Er, who knew a lot, explained to Wang Yu and Chu Yu. "Lady, madam, there is indeed the 7th prince in the palace. However, when the 7th prince was still in the womb, the Holy Master sent him into the cold palace with his own mother, Shuangwen. 4 years ago, Shuangwen died in the cold palace. The Holy Master has not seen them for so many years. The maidservant also heard that the sisters in the palace said that the 7th prince and Shuangwen were treated coldly in the cold palace when they were young, bullied by eunuchs and maids, and beaten and punished by the maids at will. They live a miserable life than ordinary people. The 7th prince's body weakening day by day." "Really?" Wang Yu quickly patted his daughter's hand and instructed, You must not choose him." "Don't worry, mother." Chu Yu promised confidently. "But one day in the future, these 2 women will go crazy fighting." Wang Yu pushed open the door of the fiber storage device without knocking, as it was about to leave. Before Wang Yuren could enter, his voice came in first and said, "I heard you have a strange disease called Pulia disease. Time is running out, and my aunt is worried about what kind of coffin to prepare for you. I'll come to discuss with you soon." After Wang Yu finished speaking, he looked at the bed of the fiber storage device and found that she was not lying on it. Looking aside, he found that the fiber storage device was standing on the side. Wang Yu was somewhat surprised by the appearance of the fiber storage device, but then he was overjoyed. With this sickly appearance, he thought to himself that the fiber storage device was really dying. Upon hearing these words, the storage fiber instrument, who was tidying up her clothes, suddenly looked up at Wang Yu with a cold and piercing gaze that made him tremble. In the past, the fiber storage device would always put a knife around her neck, and she dared not speak in silence. Now, Wang Yu thought she was lying in bed so weak that she couldn't even speak. Unexpectedly, the cold eyes of the fiber storage device were as terrifying as before, like a horse knife hanging around her neck. Chu Xianyi suddenly lowered her eyes again and restrained her expression. Wang Yu was already aware that she had purulent willow disease, and if her expression remained as sharp as before, it would inevitably make her Yun air around her suspicious. Chu Xianyi raised her eyes and her expression became very weak. Her body suddenly shook and she was about to fall to the side. Ji Nian quickly raised his hand to support her and said fiercely to Wang Yu, "You're talking nonsense. How could you curse my young lady? Just now, Dr. Zhang came to see my young lady, but she just..." Ji Nian. Chu Xianyi interrupted her and whispered to her, "Don't talk yet, I'll talk to you in detail later." Ji Nian nodded in confusion and obedience. Chu Xianyi looked up at Wang Yu, sighed lightly, and said in a soft voice, "Ah. That's really putting my aunt in a difficult position. She might as well choose another coffin for herself to prepare, so that in the future, Chu Yu's younger sister won't be as worried as her aunt is now." Yun Er, who has always been clever and knowledgeable, immediately understood the profound meaning behind Chu Xianyi and attached herself to Wang Yu, complaining, "Madam, this is clearly a satire on your old age and short life. Moreover, your behavior of choosing a coffin for her is like choosing a coffin for your own mother." Wang Yuduan was so angry that he gasped and pointed at the fiber storage device, cursing loudly, "You fiber storage device. How dare you say you're my mother? Are you saying I won't live long? You damn girl really don't understand any sense of superiority or inferiority. Uncle, you've misunderstood Xian Yi. How dare Xian Yi? Xian Yi has this incurable disease that is as strong as cotton willows, and he can no longer put a knife on your neck. You can sleep soundly at night in the future." Chu Xianyi said with a pitiful expression. The embarrassing incident before was brought up, and Wang Yu's expression was somewhat unnatural. Chu Yu suddenly exclaimed in a loud voice, "Chu fiber instrument. You are now suffering from terminal illness and there is not much time left. I warn you. It's best for you to terminate your engagement with the Crown Prince and stay away from him in the future." Chu Xianyi smiled faintly again and looked at Chu Yu, saying, "Oh. Is Chu Yu's younger sister trying to become the younger sister of His Royal Highness? Then one day, I will ask His Royal Highness to have the Holy Spirit issue an edict to appoint you as His Royal Highness's sworn sister, okay? You." Chu Yu pointed at Chu Xianyi like Wang Yu did just now and said, "Who wants to be his sister? I'm going to marry the Crown Prince in the palace in the future. So, does Chu Yu want to enter the palace as a concubine?" Chu Xianyi sighed lightly, seeming very regretful. "Then why don't I give Chu Yu an idea? The emperor is still in the prime of his life. Perhaps Chu Yu will enter the palace for the draft, and the emperor will favor you and bestow you as a concubine because of your youth." Chu Yu was furious with Chu Xianyi's words and said in a big fire, "Chu Xianyi. What are you thinking about? The emperor is already old and may die in a few years. Who wants to marry him?" Yun Er, who was standing beside her, quickly glanced outside the door and stopped Chu Yu from speaking without any hesitation, saying, "Mississippi. Be cautious. Be careful that the walls have ears. Miss, this is a serious crime of killing the head." Chu Yu was so scared that he quickly shut his mouth. Ji Nianyi, who was holding the fiber storage device, spoke with a serious tone and said, "Second Madam, Second Mississippi. My young lady is still going to meet with the Holy One. If you don't leave soon, it will delay the important matter. Can you bear it?" Wang Yu and Chu Yu left with a resentful expression on their faces. The fiber storage device withdrew its hand and stood up, free from the support of Jin Yen. Jin Yen looked at his empty hand and felt a bit confused. Just now, his own young lady was extremely weak due to being infected with wind and cold. How could she stand very straight on her own? And what exactly was the case with the willow disease just now? "Miss, how about? Should Jin Yen continue to support you?" Jin Yen asked weakly with some concern. The fiber storage instrument lightly tapped Jin Yen's forehead and said, "No need. You go prepare a carriage for me, and we will take it into the palace. By the way, choose a carriage that is tightly sealed. I will have something to say to you later." "Yes, miss." Jin Yen quickly went to prepare the carriage. End of this chapter. In chapter 5, she is here, so I don't want to escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. She's here, so I don't want to escape. The fiber storage device and Jinian are sitting in a sedan chair. Chu Xianyi looked serious and said, "Jin Yen, you must remember what I'm saying next. I'm not infected with wind and cold. The diagnosis by Dr. Zhang is a short-lived willow disease. The court is full of people with ulterior motives and cunning, and if you're not careful, you may be executed. Your young lady, what I need to do now is to use this disease to resign from my position, take my parents, as well as Xianhua and Xianhua away from the court, and live a safe and simple life." Jin Yen scratched his forehead and poked his head forward, feeling very worried. He weakly asked Chu Xianyi, "Miss, is this Pulu syndrome true or false?" The fiber storage device reached out and tapped her forehead again, scolding, "Stupid. Of course it's fake." Jin Yen patted his chest and breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh. Fake is good, fake is good. I almost scared the maid to death." Jin Yen suddenly thought of something again. "Miss, what will happen to your engagement with the crown prince?" The fiber storage instrument said calmly, "I'm afraid of losing my life, don't do it." "Ah. Ah." Jin Yen opened his mouth wide and let out a long surprise. The fiber storage instrument gave Jin Yen a few more instructions and also talked about the danger of the wooden hole. Pei Wu and Dr. Zhang arrived at the entrance of the cold palace. Dr. Zhang quickly patted Pei Wu's back and said, all right. Pei Guard, you can put the old minister down." "Thank you very much, Pei Guard." "Pei Guard is tired." Pei Wu waved his hand generously and said, "It's okay, it should be." Because Pei Wu felt guilty for causing Dr. Zhang to be swayed by horses just now, he spontaneously carried Dr. Zhang all the way to the entrance of the cold palace, despite Dr. Zhang's repeated refusal. But to be honest, Dr. Zhang really thinks that carrying Pei on his back is much better than riding a horse with him. In the cold palace, Wei Jinyan sat in front of the table, holding a paintbrush and sketching the familiar figure. The only attendant who had just cleaned the yard, Huang Sun, rubbed his hand, which was frozen red, and exhaled before walking in. He sighed and said, "Ah. This cold palace is really secluded and cool, and not a single ray of warm sunshine shines in. Every winter, he shivers from the cold. In summer, mosquitoes, ants, and flying insects will fly all over the sky, making the servant's face almost swollen into a pig's head." Huang Sun continued to complain, "Young master. Other princes have already been granted royal fiefs by the Holy Emperor, and there is also the crown prince who has been favored since childhood. You can have whatever you want, but you have been completely forgotten by the Holy Emperor in this cold palace. If you want to be a servant, why don't we set off a big fire and pretend to be dead here? Run away quickly. With your handsome appearance and full of talent, young master, you will definitely be able to live more freely and richly than in this cold palace after going out. Wei Jin and Yan did not like the identity of the seventh prince, so Huang Sun always called him the young master. Wei Jinyan's hand paused and he looked up. I don't want to escape. Why? Young master, said Huang Sun with a tearful expression on his face. Wei Jinyan raised an eyebrow and said, she will stay in this palace forever in the future, so I don't want to escape. Wei Jinyan continued to bow his head and paint. Huang Sun couldn't help but sigh again and couldn't help but feel regretful, saying, alas. Young master, if only you were the crown prince. You don't have to miss each other day. The paintbrush in Wei Jinyan's hand paused again, and he trembled his eyes slightly. He said, even if it's the position of the 9-5 supreme sovereigns, as long as I want to fight, I will definitely be able to fight for it one day. But the person she likes is not me. What's the use of me wanting that noble status? Huang Sun suddenly didn't know what to say. He lowered his eyes and caught a glimpse of the person depicted in Wei Jinyan's painting, feeling somewhat surprised. Young master, you usually paint the handsome young lady of the Chu family. Why did you paint her like such a delicate and weak little daughter today? Huang Sun couldn't understand. I don't know why, but last night I suddenly dreamt of her little daughter's home and felt happy, so I drew it. Wei Jinyan looked at the painting and fell into contemplation. Suddenly, the voice of Dr. Zhang came from the hospital. Is the seventh prince here? Is the seventh prince here? I have something important to discuss. Huang Sun extended his head to the courtyard, looking for someone with a voice. He couldn't help but exclaim, it's been a long time since I've seen you. How could someone come to this cold palace to talk to you, young master, and have something important to discuss? Wei Jinyan quickly rolled up the painting in his hand, put it in the long box next to him, and then walked out. When he saw Dr. Zhang with white hair all over his head, Wei Jinyan was somewhat surprised. Immediately, he slightly bent down and bowed to Dr. Zhang, saying, Dr. Zhang. Dr. Zhang was somewhat surprised. How could the seventh prince recognize the old minister? When I first remembered, I heard my mother say that Dr. Zhang was the only one who stepped into this cold palace to deliver medicine to me. Now, the second person to step into this cold palace is also Dr. Zhang. For Dr. Zhang, Wei Jin and Yan were deeply moved. Since the outbreak of the high fever, Dr. Zhang saw that the mother and son were really pitiful and wanted to secretly send some food and charcoal blankets. However, the guards discovered and stopped him. Zhang Tai still had a doubt in his heart. How did the seventh prince recognize the old minister since he had never seen him before? Wei Jin and Yan smiled faintly and looked at the official attire on his body. He replied, when the former empress was pregnant with the third prince, she was poisoned by someone. Fortunately, she was treated by Dr. Zhang in a timely manner, which saved the third prince. The former empress ordered someone to sew this unique medical attire and bestow it upon Dr. Zhang. The plum blossom embroidery on her shoulder symbolizes Dr. Zhang's kindness and virtue. Although Dr. Zhang is a low-key and humble person, he couldn't help but feel a little happy when praised like this. Hee. It's rare that the seventh prince still knows about the old minister's past. Pei Wu, who remained silent on the side, couldn't help but pound the arm of Dr. Zhang and remind him, Dr. Zhang, should we get to the point now? General Chu is still waiting for us to save his life. General Chu. Miss Chu's family. Wei Jinyan's expression suddenly changed and he urgently asked, what happened to Xianyi? Wei Jinyan gave the fiber storage device 3 different names in one sentence. Pei Wu saw Wei Jinyan's expression so anxious, and couldn't help but wonder, hey. Seventh Prince, you have never met General Chu. Why do you look even more anxious than our crown prince? Wei Jinyan paused for a moment, restrained his expression, and replied, Shabei has been repeatedly attacked. General Chu bears a heavy responsibility and is going to lead 100,000 troops to attack Shabei today. I'm just worried that if General Chu has an accident, it will affect the entire Nanyuan country. General Chu. What's wrong with her? Dr. Zhang's expression was solemn, and he replied, before General Chu set off today, he suddenly vomited blood and fainted. The Crown Prince then sent an old minister to diagnose him. After diagnosing his pulse, the old minister found that General Chu had the same incurable disease called Puliu syndrome as Shuangwen in the past. General Chu's whole body was as strong as cotton willows, and he was powerless to return to heaven. Willow disease. Wei Jinyan's expression paused. It was impossible. Even during the incubation period, Wei Jinyan could see the symptoms of willow disease at a glance. The appearance of the fiber storage device does not resemble that of a person suffering from purulent willow disease. So what is the reason for her sudden vomiting of blood and fainting? Wei Jin and Yen suddenly remembered that Chu Xianyi was aware of the symptoms of Puliu syndrome, and suddenly realized that she must have intentionally caused symptoms similar to Puliu syndrome. So why did she do this? Wei Jin Yen was full of doubts, but he suddenly realized a key point. Will he be going to see her in a fair and upright manner later? Is it? Really? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. I am allergic to the gaze of women. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. I am allergic to the gaze of women. Zhang Tai continued, but Shuangwen was able to give birth to the seventh prince safely and spend more than 10 years in the cold palace, with mild symptoms of weakness. Therefore, I would like to ask if the seventh prince has been able to extend his life as the crown prince. Before Dr. Zhang could finish his last word, Wei Jinyan quickly replied, of course there is. I'll go with you to the Chu Fu. Pei Wu and Dr. Zhang looked at each other, obviously not expecting the seventh prince to agree so happily. Great. Then let's go now. This speed once again surprised Pei Wu and Dr. Zhang. Okay. With Pei Shui, Wei Jinyan smoothly left the mansion. Over here. The fiber storage instrument felt that the carriage was too slow, so it reached out and flipped the curtains next to it. After looking at the road outside, it instructed Jin Yen, make the coachman turn right in front and get closer. Yes, miss. Jin Yen stood up. As he walked, the sensitive fiber storage instrument suddenly felt a faint howl coming from outside. The next second, the coachman suddenly stopped the carriage, and Jin Yen almost fell off the seat. The fiber storage instrument quickly helped Jin Yen. The fiber storage device opened the curtains and suddenly a large brown object flashed past it, then disappeared. Jin Yen lifted the car curtain and asked the driver, what's wrong? Why did you suddenly stop the car? The coachman rubbed his eyes hard and looked ahead carefully, but didn't see anything. He paused for a moment, then came to his senses and said to Jin Yen, it's not a big deal. Maybe it was just me who was confused and thought I saw some monster. Let's keep walking. Oh, okay. Yoshinori returned to the carriage. Recalling the scene that flashed by just now, is it not the giant beast pterygium described in that strange book? But the deep mountains and dense forests where pterygium prefers shade tides the most. Although there is a mountain here, it can be seen from the edge at a glance, and the trees on the mountain in winter are not lush, only bare trunks and white snow. How could pterygium appear here? Are you just as dazzled as the coachman? Here, Wei Jin, Yen, Huang Sun, and Dr. Zhang are sitting in the carriage, while Pei Wu is driving his horse. However, Zhang Tai, who was slightly exhausted, was dozing off with his head swaying. Huang Sun looked at his young master's joyful expression and couldn't help but whisper in his ear, young master, Miss Chu's family is suffering from willow disease. Aren't you overly sad and extremely sad? Wei Jinyan suddenly picked up the dish with dim sum on the wagon and knocked Huang Sun on the head. He whispered, don't curse her. Huang Sun was full of doubts and rubbed his head with a face of grievance. Wei Jinyan and his group arrived at the Chu mansion, but did not see the figure of Chu Xianyi. Instead, they saw Chu Yu walking towards them. Pei Wu looked at Chu Yu and asked, Miss Chu Er, where is General Chu? Chu Yu replied angrily, I'm going to the palace to face the Holy Spirit. She woke up. But entering the palace to face the Holy One, why didn't we see General Chu all the way just now? Pei Wu was puzzled. Chu Yu replied angrily, how do I know? After finishing speaking, Chu Yu suddenly saw Wei Jinyan beside him, and his eyes were fixed on him, unable to move away. His eyes were full of peach blossoms. Wei Jinyan was staring at her very uncomfortable and quickly turned his face away. Chu Yu continued to stare at him and couldn't help but ask, who is this young master? Pei Wu answered for Wei Jinyan, this is the seventh prince, but... Miss Chu Er, why do you keep staring at the seventh prince? The seventh prince. Chu Yu was taken aback, realizing that he was the frail seventh prince who had been unpopular in the cold palace since childhood. But when she saw the seventh prince, it seemed that he didn't have the deadly willow and bamboo pole he had imagined. He had a yellowish complexion and a thin appearance, and his face was a very handsome and pure young master. Chu Yu became more and more addicted to it. Wei Jinyan couldn't help but frown and cough lightly, saying, Miss Chu Er, can you stop looking? I'm allergic to women's eyes. Allergic to a woman's gaze. Ah. Chu Yu was somewhat surprised. And Dr. Zhang immediately became interested. He carefully observed Wei Jinyan's face, full of doubts, how could there be such a disease in this world? Wei Jinyan gritted his head and said, yes, Dr. Zhang. The wild search on the side couldn't help but cover his mouth and chuckle. Inside the Xuani hall. Standing in front of the emperor in a dragon robe stood the crown prince, as well as the elder brother of the crown prince's mother, Yuan Ming. Yuan Ming was the current prime minister of the court and was highly trusted by the emperor, with no one in the court's ranks surpassing him. Liner, are you sure that Dr. Zhang's diagnosis is correct? General Chu really has an incurable disease as strong as cotton willows. When I saw Xini's words with my own eyes, my anger was like flowing silk. After vomiting blood, I fainted, and I can trust the medical skills of Dr. Zhang. Wei Junlin replied. The Prime Minister Yuan raised his deep eyes and said to the Emperor, these 100000 soldiers are all waiting for General Chu to go to the north of the desert. Now that General Chu has this strange disease, is it an ominous sign, just like Shu Guiren did in the past? The Emperor's expression paused, mixed with a hint of guilt towards Shu Guiren and the seventh prince, who had already been forgotten by him, or feeling that Prime Minister Yuan's words had a hint of truth and were worrying. But those who hold the throne should prioritize the world. He firmly believes that the words of Master Wuchen will never be wrong, so of course he is thinking of the latter. The Emperor is easily influenced by others and has no independent opinions, but he feels that his actions are only for the country. He is brave enough to listen to others' opinions and has no fault. However, Wei Junlin still had a fiber storage device in his heart. He couldn't help but argue for it, Uncle, you better not make hasty assertions. The Emperor regained his composure and said, Lin Er's words are reasonable. Aiqing, please do not make hasty assertions. The top priority now is to go on a campaign against Shabei. If the matter of the Crown Prince is reported, it will surely destabilize our army and cause great chaos. This will give Shabei an opportunity to take advantage of it. Prime Minister Yuan's expression hesitated, as if he had something to say. The Emperor couldn't help but take the initiative to speak, Prime Minister Yuan, if you have anything to say, just say it. Don't hide it in front of me. I dare to recommend someone to the Emperor. Who is it? My eldest son, Yuan Qing. Prime Minister Yuan suddenly knelt down and exclaimed loudly, please have the Emperor let him replace General Jing Wei in the expedition to Shabei. My son will definitely be able to defeat Shabei and return home. The Emperor pondered for a few seconds before suddenly remembering last year's palace martial arts competition, where Chu Xianyi won first place and Yuan Qing came in second. Yuan Qing is indeed highly skilled in martial arts, but Sha is a savage person, mostly cunning and cunning. He has no experience in fighting, so. Although Yuan Qing is much older than the fiber storage instrument and is not a young boy, he is already over 30 years old. He should act steadily, but the emperor still feels a bit uneasy about entrusting the expedition to Sha to Yuan Qing, who has no experience in war. Prime Minister Yuan continued to kneel and increased his voice, saying, "Your Majesty. General Chu has only followed General Chu on several expeditions and has achieved some success in leading troops to fight. Moreover, General Chu is still a young woman in her teens. Sha has always underestimated me because General Chu is a young girl in her teens. Now, it is only appropriate for Yuan Qing to replace General Chu on the expedition to Sha." The emperor's gaze relaxed slightly, as if he felt that what Prime Minister Yuan said was quite reasonable. However, Wei Junlin's heart was filled with doubts. Even if his uncle was eager to make his cousin behave in front of the emperor, there were 10,000 other ways, and he wouldn't even care about his cousin's life. The people of Sha were unreasonable and cunning, making it difficult to break through. His uncle's young son once fell from a high place, broke his head, and couldn't become a great weapon. He was already old and could no longer bear children. Isn't uncle worried about his only son dying in Sha? Wei Junlin was about to ask the question in his heart when suddenly, Li Gongdong from outside came to report it. "Your Majesty. General Chu is right outside the door, requesting to see the emperor." General Chu. Coincidentally, he was just about to explore what was going on with this coincidental illness. Quick announcement. "Yes. Your Majesty." Li Gonggang shouted loudly at the door, "General Xian Chu, pay an audience." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Next time you fall in a softer place. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Next time you fall in a softer place. The fiber storage device was supported by Jin Yen, and its body was still slightly swaying. As soon as it entered the door, the fiber storage device trembled its eyelashes slightly, and then fell head-on, along with Jin Yen. Damn it! For the first time, the fiber storage instrument felt that the floor inside the Xuani Hall was so hard. Jin Yen helped the fiber storage device up and said to it in a volume that even ants couldn't hear, "Miss, it hurts so much. Are you exaggerating this a bit?" The fiber storage device replied at the same volume, "Then next time, I'll switch to a softer place to fall." Wei Junlin quickly came over to help Jin Yen hold on to Chu Xianyi, but as soon as Wei Junlin touched Chu Xianyi's hand, a scene suddenly came to her mind of her previous family being killed and her heart pierced by 10,000 arrows. Her lowered eyes were filled with extreme disgust and resentment. She wants to kill Wei Junlin. She's going to kill Wei Junlin. This is her most genuine thought at this moment. Wei Junlin seemed to be in a daze for a long time when he saw her, and couldn't help but ask, "Xianyi, what's wrong with you?" Chu Xianyi buried her hatred in her eyes. She lifted her gaze and looked at the crown prince, her eyes instantly becoming soft and innocent. She shook her head slightly, so weak that she couldn't even speak. She was supported by Wei Junlin and Jin Yen. With the steps of a turtle and ants, she walked unsteadily to the emperor. She wanted to kneel down, but her legs bent a little, but she lost strength and fell to the ground with a plop. Xianyi. Mississippi. Jin Yen also knelt down and supported the fiber storage device. Chu Xianyi spread her hands on the ground, her head on the back of her hands, sobbing and feeling as if she were on a whim, saying, "Your Majesty, Xianyi is guilty. Xianyi is suffering from a terminal illness, with little time left, and her whole body is as strong as cotton willows. She is no longer able to lead 100,000 troops to march to Sha. Please grant Xianyi the death penalty." The emperor lowered his gaze and stared at the storage fiber instrument on the ground. For a long time, he suddenly bent down and placed his hands on the arm of the storage fiber instrument, gesturing for her to get up. General Chu, get up quickly. The fiber storage device really lifted its head and was supported by Ji Nian and Wei Junlin to stand up, not kneeling more. After the storage fiber instrument stood up, the emperor found that her face was covered in tears, with a pitiful and delicate appearance. The Chu family has been loyal and virtuous for generations, fighting on the battlefield for our country. Your grandfather has also made great contributions to our Nanyuan country. The fact that General Chu is suffering from a terminal illness is a source of compassion for me. Moreover, General Chu is still unconscious. How can I grant General Chu the death? Before the emperor could finish speaking, Chu Xianyi knelt down again with a thud, feeling extremely excited. Thank you very much to the emperor for giving Chu Xianyi immortality. The emperor couldn't help but twitch his lips. Xian is really clever. However, as the 9-5 sovereign, he must keep his word. The emperor bent down again and asked her to get up, but Chu Xianyi didn't get up this time. On the contrary, she lowered her head deeper. He sobbed again and said, Your Majesty, Xianyi is now as powerful as a cotton willow and has no place to use for the court. Xianyi is speechless and will face the emperor again. Please withdraw the name of General Jingwei of Xianyi, the name of General Yongxing of father, and the name of Lady Haran of mother, and let Xianyi return home with her family to spend the day. The emperor suddenly changed his expression and returned to his hometown. No way. General Chu, although you are now as strong as cotton willows and cannot be used by the court, I have decided to retain all the titles of your Chu family, including the name of your Jingwei Grand General, because of your loyal and meritorious deeds throughout the generations of the Chu family. Chu Xianyi frowned suddenly. Why did she do this herself? The emperor still retains her title as the Grand General of Jingwei. Is it really a tribute to her heir apparent for everything she has done for Nanyuan province? Not right. Before my father fell into a coma, he was deeply loved by the people for winning consecutive battles. There were also many ministers in the court who wanted to win over my father. When my father returned from the palace, he once told her that his reputation had attracted the emperor's fear. The emperor intended to demote him and recruit his soldiers. Originally, she was appointed as the Grand General of Jingwei and agreed to let her go to the north of the desert, but Chu Xianyi felt a bit unbelievable in his first life. Nowadays, all members of the Chu family have removed their titles and returned to their hometowns to spend their days. At that time, General Chu will be in the hands of the emperor. Shouldn't this be fulfilling his wish? Why does the emperor want her and her family to stay in the court? Or, more precisely, to stay under the emperor's watchful eye? But Dad is unconscious, he is weak, and Xianhua is only 6 years old. The Chu family is no longer powerful. What is the reason why the emperor must keep the Chu family in court? The fiber storage device returned to its thoughts and lifted its head. Looking at Wei Junlin with a sorrowful expression in his eyes, he immediately said to the emperor, Your Majesty, Xian Yi has been in love with the crown prince for a long time and has been fortunate enough to be married by the Empress Dowager. But now that Xian Yi has limited time, he does not want to burden His Royal Highness the Crown Prince anymore. Xian Yi is willing to terminate his engagement with the Crown Prince, and the Crown Prince can find another good person. Xian Yi. How could you say such words? You know my feelings for you. Wei Junlin said urgently. At this time, Wei Junlin had not yet become emperor, and Chu Xianyi's position as a general had not yet threatened him, so he still liked Chu Xianyi. The emperor's eyes lit up as he had long wanted to terminate his engagement, but unfortunately, it was a decree personally issued by his mother that he dared not act recklessly. Then I will. Father. Wei Junlin quickly interrupted the emperor's words and swore confidently, Father. My son and I are in love with each other. Even if Xianyi is terminally ill, my son will definitely marry her. What a beautiful oath, she used to be so pleased with the person in front of her, but now, Chu Xianyi's heart dare not be moved at all. You. The emperor looked at Wei Junlin with a somewhat resentful expression. The prime minister of Yuan, who had been observing his words and expressions on the side, suddenly spoke up and said, as the crown prince is the crown prince of a country, the decision to marry should be carefully made. The country should be the first priority, and the crown prince is already suffering from willow disease. Prime Minister Yuan suddenly glanced at Chu Xianyi and continued, I say something difficult to listen to. General Chu is not to blame. Even if General Chu suffers from this illness and can continue to live for more than 10 years like Shu Guiren, it is still an ominous sign for the royal family and will bring disaster. This dead old man, who disliked him in his previous life but still dislikes him in this life, actually calls her an ominous omen. Bullying her now is weak and boneless, with no father supporting her, right? In her previous life, she insisted on fighting this dead old man. However, has Shu Guiren in the palace ever suffered from this disease? Still living for over a decade. The storage fiber instrument has only heard the masked young master mention this disease, but has never heard him mention the method of prolonging life. Chu Xianyi asked Ji Nian to help her up. She looked at Prime Minister Yuan with a faint smile and suddenly walked towards him, wiping tears with her sleeves and making a sorrowful expression. Lian said, Prime Minister makes sense. Xian Yi's illness is indeed very strange, and as soon as she was discovered, she was powerless to recover. Xian Yi only got this disease 2 years ago when she went to the Shang dynasty to search for his brother's body. Chu Xianyi suddenly covered her lips in surprise and approached the Prime Minister of Yuan, isn't it? Isn't it that Xianyi's illness was transmitted by the people of the Shang dynasty? Ah! Prime Minister Yuan and the Emperor were immediately terrified. Yuan Qing quickly covered his mouth and nose, retreated back until he collided with a pillar behind him, and covered his waist with one hand. How can this disease be contagious? Prime Minister Yuan shouted, Chu Xianyi. You know this disease can be transmitted to people, so you came to the palace to meet the Emperor. If the Emperor gets this disease, can you afford it? The Emperor on the side was instantly frightened and turned pale. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The Unfair Consort Ning and Luo Xing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The unfair consort Ning and Luo Xing. Chu Xianyi smiled calmly and said, Your Majesty, you can naturally understand the meaning of Xianyi's words. But isn't Prime Minister Yuan foolish? You can't even understand Xianyi's jokes. I heard that Shu Guiren was sent to the cold palace 3 months after he fell ill. If Pulu disease can really be transmitted to humans, wouldn't it be possible to infect many palace maids before Shu Guiren was sent to the cold palace after he fell ill? Upon hearing it was a joke, the Emperor breathed a sigh of relief. Prime Minister Yuan blushed with anger and said, You. How could you make such a joke? The Emperor smiled and tried to smooth things over, saying, General Chu must have been suffering from willow disease and not in a good mood, so he made a joke with Prime Minister Yuan to ease his mood. Prime Minister Yuan should be more magnanimous and not argue with General Chu. Humph. Prime Minister Yuan shook his sleeve and let out a cold snort. The fiber storage device rolled its eyes inwardly, scaring you so much that you would die in despair. However, now she needs to quickly withdraw from the marriage. If she can't withdraw from the court, she must eventually withdraw into a marriage, right? Your Majesty, the marriage between Xianyi and the Crown Prince. Xianyi. Father. Wei Junlin urgently shouted. The Emperor glanced at Wei Junlin and pondered for a few seconds before saying, After all, this engagement was given by my mother. Let me consider it again. Consider it. That would be the majority. The Emperor only did not agree immediately in consideration of the fact that the Empress Dowager had given her marriage. However, the Empress Dowager is already old and has been bedridden all day. Many past events have been forgotten, and the palace maids need to feed soup and medicine all day to make ends meet. The Emperor will definitely not be able to manage this marriage anymore. In a few days, the emperor will announce the termination of the engagement. The reason why the Empress Dowager married her to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is because Chu Ling once saved the Empress Dowager's life, and the Empress Dowager was grateful, which led to the marriage. Xianyi knows. Xianyi paused and said again, Xianyi has another important matter to tell the emperor today. What's up? It's about the killing of concubine Ning in the palace. Killed. The emperor was shocked. She clearly committed suicide out of fear of guilt. Why did she say she was killed? The incident about concubine Ning is a well-known shameful past, and when it comes to it, the emperor still has a somewhat embarrassed expression. Chu Xianyi said, I have met concubine Ning a few times in the palace and we have had a great conversation, so we must not allow concubine Ning to be slandered by anyone, let alone allow the emperor's face to be slandered by villains. Defamation. Are you serious about saying this? In the previous life, it was rumored that Consort Ning had an affair with General Luo Xing. Consort Ning committed suicide in the palace, and Luo Xing was exiled and died in exile. General Luo Xing was once the commander of the Forbidden Army in the palace, young and promising, with outstanding performance. Chu Ling was unconscious, and after the death of his elder brother Chu Xianyi, General Luo Xing was appreciated and recommended by the court officials, and was appointed as a general, leading troops to fight for Chu Ling once. After Luo Xing was appointed as a general, the emperor promoted his subordinates to be the commander of the Forbidden Army. General Luo Xing won the battle with a score of 1.2 and personally took down the enemy's head, which was a rare talent. If it weren't for General Luo Xing being slandered and having an affair with concubine Ning in the palace, it would have been Luo Xing who led the troops to fight in the north of the desert. 3 years later, the place where concubine Ning lived had already been changed to concubine Lan. However, when concubine Lan saw a beautiful vase, she kept it for a long time. One day, a palace maid accidentally broke the vase while cleaning the room. Surprisingly, a decaying and withered finger with a contracted finger appeared in the soil. The palace maid immediately told concubine Lan. Sui Lanfei reported to the emperor and realized that the incident between Consort Ning and General Luo Xing had been wrongly accused. The severed finger on the hand was cut off by Consort Ning with a dagger during a fight between Consort Ning and that person, and was picked up by the palace maids who served Consort Ning. However, the palace maids were timid and did not dare to expose it to the emperor, so they hid it in the soil of the potted flower. And in this life, only a few days have passed since the death of concubine Ning. What Xianyi said is true. When Yuer, a palace maid who had previously served concubine Ning, went out to visit her family, she met Xianyi yesterday. She knew that I had met concubine Ning a few times before and told her that concubine Ning only had the emperor in her heart. Having an affair with someone was unjustified, and concubine Ning did not commit suicide either. Wei Junlin, standing beside him, added, yesterday happened to be the last day of the visit, and the palace maid must have returned to the palace. Why don't father and emperor call her to ask? The emperor looked at Duke Li beside him and proclaimed, Duke Li, go and bring that palace maid named Yuer over. The emperor couldn't help but feel great joy in his heart. If concubine Ning was really wronged, then his face would return. The rain was brought and I knelt on the ground trembling. Lift your head, the emperor ordered. I heard that I met General Chu when I went home to visit my family yesterday. Did you tell her that Consort Ning had an affair with General Luo Xing, which was a wrongful act? The fiber storage device looked at Yuer on the ground, and Yuer glanced at it. Although Yuer didn't know why the fiber storage device knew the truth and said she had seen her yesterday, Yuer was a bit clever. In the face of being brought to the emperor, she should also know what to do next to save her life. Yuer slammed her head heavily on the ground and shouted, I am guilty. I know that Consort Ning has been wrongly accused, but I dare not expose her. It's only because I still have elderly parents and young siblings in my family to take care of. That person's influence is too great, and I am afraid. The emperor exclaimed excitedly, So, is it really unjust for Consort Ning to have an affair with Luo Xing? Tell me quickly, who is the person who falsely accused Consort Ning? Hui. Hui Emperor, it's Empress Zhang. It's Empress Zhang who falsely accused Consort Ning. The severed finger buried under the orchid soil in the Orchid Palace is evidence. The emperor took someone to the Lan Fei Palace to retrieve the severed finger, and then imprisoned Zhang Guifei. Zhang Guifei was the eldest daughter of the Minister of Revenue, and she was highly favored, so Yuer dared not expose her. But along with Consort Zhang, there was also Consort Ning who received the holy favor. Consort Zhang explained that it was because she was jealous of Consort Ning's holy favor that General Luo Xing, who had been ordered into the palace by the emperor, was framed and had an affair with Consort Ning. The emperor immediately wrote a decree of acquittal, sending someone to pick up General Luo Xing and let him lead a 100,000-strong army to attack Shabei. However, if General Luo Xing returns to the palace first and then sets off with the army to attack Shabei, time will be too late. So the emperor ordered Yuan Qing, the eldest son of Prime Minister Yuan, to lead 100,000 troops to join General Luo Xing. The expedition to Shabei has already been settled, and the termination of the engagement with the crown prince has basically been decided. The only thing left is to stay away from the court. We can discuss countermeasures in the future, and Chu Xianyi has left the palace. Wei Jun originally wanted to follow Chu Xianyi to the Chu mansion and inquire about the method of extending Chu Xianyi's life for the seventh prince, but the emperor stopped him. Father, have you made up your mind to terminate the engagement between your son and Xianyi? Wei Junlin frowned, feeling a bit low. I have long wanted to terminate your engagement. In a few days, I will draft a decree to terminate your engagement. Father. There's no need to discuss this matter again. There are so many women in the world, and you can marry as many as you want. Why insist on having her? Father. You appointed Xianyi as General Jingwei's expedition to Shabei, which was a strategy to lure the tiger away from the mountain. In order to find that thing, you put her daughter's family in such a dangerous situation. My courtiers did not say anything. After all, that thing is indeed crucial to father. Wei Junlin seemed a bit annoyed. But now Xianyi is as strong as cotton willows, General Chu has no day to wake up, and Xianhua is a 16-year-old child. The day will be long, and we will definitely be able to find that thing. The Chu family will no longer be threatened. Why does Father Emperor insist on separating Xianyi and me? You rebellious son. The emperor was furious. One day, when you sit in my seat, you will know why I did this. Someone. Bring the crown prince back to the palace, face the wall and think for 10 days. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Unobstructed, read as long as you want. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Unobstructed, read as long as you want. Chu Xianyi sat in the sedan chair of the returning mansion, recalling the strange expression of the Yuan Prime Minister in the Xuanyi Hall when he heard that Consort Ning had an affair with someone was fake. When she mentioned the palace maid Yuer, there seemed to be a hint of panic on Prime Minister Yuan's face. He moved his steps as if he wanted to leave. Chu Xianyi gave him a glance, and he withdrew his foot. I feel a bit uneasy, but I also pretend to be calm. Is it difficult or not? Consort Ning and General Luo Xing were falsely accused and related to Prime Minister Yuan. But the culprit, Consort Zhang, has no relation to him, and her father, the Ministry of Revenue, has no written connection with him. Are you overthinking yourself? Chu Xianyi looked at Jin Yan, who was drowsy next to him, and casually asked, Jin Yan, did you feel that Prime Minister Yuan's expression was a bit off when you just heard me mention the palace maid Yuer in the Xuanyi Hall? Jin Yan rubbed his eyes, shook his head, and worked hard to wake up. He raised his eyes and pondered for a few seconds before approaching the fiber storage device and saying, yes. Chu Xianyi was overjoyed, and the little girl Jin Yan became smarter. Do you think there is a connection between Prime Minister Yuan, Consort Ning, and Luo Xing? Yes. Ji Nian nodded heavily without hesitation. I think it must be Zhang Guifei and Prime Minister Yuan who have an affair with the imperial concubine and courtiers. When they met privately, they were discovered by concubine Ning, and the villain first reported and accused General Luo Xing, who happened to enter the palace, of having an affair with concubine Ning. Ji Nian's expression was proud, as if applauding wildly for his own views. Chu Xianyi reluctantly tugged at the corner of her mouth and said, I shouldn't have asked you. Prime Minister Yuan is already old and has long since passed away. Zhang Guifei is in her 20s, how could she possibly be interested in such a terrible old man like him? Ji Nian smiled awkwardly and said, oh, that's right too. The fiber storage device is once again lost in thought. Not right. Chu Xianyi had met concubine Ning several times before. Concubine Ning was not a weak and boneless little woman. Concubine Ning was very tall, almost shoulder-length with the emperor, and had considerable strength. Chu Xianyi had even seen her pick up a palace maid who fell off a roof tile with her bare hands. Moreover, she held a dagger and chopped off a severed finger of Consort Zhang. And Zhang Guifei is more than one head shorter than Ning Fei, and she looks like a thin and weak jade woman. Therefore, it is impossible for Zhang Guifei to successfully kill Ning Fei alone in a fight with her, and to create a false image of hanging herself on the beam of the house. Someone must have conspired with her, and that person could be Prime Minister Yuan. Could it be that the Prime Minister of Yuan and the Minister of Revenue colluded secretly, and Chu Xianyi never noticed it in his lifetime? What is their purpose then? Just to help Zhang Guifei eliminate Ning Fei, the rival who threatens her status. If the reason is only like this, there are 10,000 ways to get rid of Consort Ning, why bother bringing General Luo Xing? So their only purpose is for General Luo Xing. So it is very likely that General Luo Xing from the previous life was not killed by bandits, but being assassinated. Not good. General Luo Xing is in danger. In the previous life, General Luo Xing was killed by bandits passing by Wuzhou Mountain in the early hours of the morning. In this life, although the guards behind the scenes sent by the emperor to deliver the imperial edict will not be killed, they will never let Luo Xing deliver it before his death. And Wuzhou Mountain is a narrow road facing cliffs and cliffs, making it difficult for the army to walk, so the merger of Luo Xing and the army is not on Wuzhou Mountain. She needs to go save Luo Xing quickly. But now she is on the street, bustling with cars and horses, crowded with people and eyes. Many people on the street recognize her family, so she can't get off the sedan chair and ride horses here. She has to go back home first, change her outfit, go out through the back door, and hurry up to catch up. The storage fiber instrument was helped off the sedan chair by Ji Nian, but when she saw the scene in front of her, she was a bit dumbfounded. At the entrance of the storage house stood 3 neatly arranged people, including a stranger whom they had never met before. But how did she feel that the stranger's gaze towards her was burning? As soon as Dr. Zhang saw Chu Xianyi come down, he was very excited and said, General Chu, I heard that you just entered the palace and became a saint. If I had known earlier, we would have been waiting for General Chu at the entrance of the palace. The steps under Chu Xianyi's feet were weak and boneless, and her face was pale and devoid of qi and blood. She pitied and said, Thank you very much for waiting here, Dr. Zhang. But my illness is too weak to turn the tide. Why bother Dr. Zhang with such a tiring journey? It's getting late, why don't Dr. Zhang and Luo Xing return to the palace earlier? Suddenly, Wei Jinyan, who was standing beside her, turned to her and bowed slightly. Miss Chu, I am Wei Jinyan. Wei Jinyan did not use the identity of the 7th prince, and in front of Chu Xianyi, he claimed to be below. Chu Xianyi was taken aback for a moment. The voice was somewhat familiar, and she slowly turned her head to look at him. Suddenly, she couldn't help but want to get closer to him. She couldn't help but take a few steps forward and looked at his face. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her mind. The next second, lightning and thunder came out of her ears crazily, and tears came down in unison. She could really feel someone holding her. Rainstorm hit the person, and the person's tears fell on her eyes, nose tip, lips, cheeks, and oracles. If I ascend to the throne and marry you, you won't end up today. It's me who's useless, it's me who couldn't protect you. I thought he really meant it to you, but in the end, I ended up being blind. Wait for me. I'll avenge you. Let him go to hell. Then, a deafening sound of gongs and drums suddenly appeared in the ear of the fiber storage device. Kill. Kill me. Kill Attack the Imperial City. Seize the throne. Capture the Dog Emperor alive. Attack the Imperial City. Seize the throne. Capture the Dog Emperor alive. Attack the Imperial City. Seize the throne. Capture the Dog Emperor alive. For a moment, blood flowed profusely, rivers of blood flowed, and corpses lay everywhere. One side took the upper hand, while the other gradually collapsed. Finally, all surrendered with swords raised. A person dressed in a dragon robe was cut off by a person holding a long sword and knelt to the ground. She can feel that sword, she knows it, or it's her sword. Keep going. The courtiers in the court knelt down and shouted in unison. Long live the Emperor, long live. Continuing. As the screen turned, the world quieted down, and the fiber storage device felt cold all over, with a chill emanating from the surroundings. I finally avenged you and let him go to hell. I cut off his limbs and made him into a human body, which was put in a dung bucket. I soaked it with my own special life-preserving potion. No matter how hard I tortured him, he would never die. I will insert an arrow into him every day until it fills his entire body and then pull it out again. When the wound heals, I will insert it back and forth. I want him to experience the feeling of being pierced by 10,000 arrows until you wake up, which is the end. She was held by the person who whispered in her ear, "You'll wake up, won't you?" Suddenly, Pei Wu kept shouting at her, "General Chu! General Chu! General Chu!" Ah! The voice in the ear of the fiber storage instrument suddenly disappeared, and she regained her senses. Pei Wu kindly reminded, "General Chu, please don't stare at the seventh prince anymore. The seventh prince has a strange illness and he will glance at women." "No problem." Wei Jinyan quickly interrupted him and looked at Chu Xianyi, saying softly, "Miss Chu can watch as long as she wants." Pei Wu's mouth widened in shock and said, "Sigh. Seventh prince, when Miss Chu stared at you just now, didn't you say that?" "Really? I forgot a bit. What I said earlier." Wei Jinyan's face was sincere. Pei Wu couldn't help but mutter in his heart. The seventh prince's memory is really bad. The seventh prince. Chu Xianyi's face showed surprise. The seventh prince, who was framed by Wei Junlin in his previous life to privately raise secret soldiers and seek power and usurp the throne. The seventh prince of Shu Guiren, who suffered from willow disease and was sent to the cold palace by the Holy Emperor. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. My eyes are cold. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. My eyes cold. What is he doing here? It's over. Chu Xianyi thought of a terrible thing. Shu Guiren was suffering from willow disease, and he was also the son of Shu Guiren. Dr. Zhang must have brought him here because the seventh prince had some way to prolong his life. With him and Shu Guiren relying on each other for more than a decade, it is highly possible to see that her condition of willow disease is fake. The fiber storage device suddenly felt a wave of dizziness and palpitations. Sure enough, Dr. Zhang explained to Chu Xianyi, the seventh prince's mother, Shu Guiren, also suffered from willow disease, but she survived safely for more than 10 years. However, her body was slightly weaker than ordinary people, so I went to search for the seventh prince with Pei Shiwei on behalf of the prince. The seventh prince really has a way to extend his life. Pei Shuangwen and I invited the 7th prince, General Chu. Let's go in quickly and let the 7th prince take a look for you. It's really freezing outside. In fact, he had been wanting to go in for a long time, but Pei Shuangwen, a stubborn tiger, insisted on waiting for Chu Xianyi at the door. For some reason, the 7th prince, despite his thin clothes, refused to go in and remained motionless, staring in the direction General Chu was coming. The cold made his old bone ache. Chu Xianyi walked nervously towards the courtyard. If she refused to see a doctor and drove the 7th prince away, the Holy Emperor would inevitably suspect that her illness was fake. If the Holy Emperor took the opportunity to accuse her of plotting rebellion, her rebirth would be ruined. She needs to calm down. Weimu acupoint is extremely similar to Puliu syndrome, and the 7th prince may not be able to see it either. She had to secretly use the dangerous wood acupoint now, and this time she had to exert more force and spit out more blood, which was more realistic, but just as she was about to use her hand, she reached into her waist. Wei Jinyan, who was walking side by side with her, suddenly turned his head to look at her and said, Puliu syndrome is difficult to cure. If I want to treat Miss Chu, I will have to stay in the mansion for a while. Excuse me. Wei Jinyan lowered his head slightly and looked at her with a smile on his face. The hand of the fiber storage device was about to vomit blood before using the dangerous wooden hole at the waist. Stay for a while. Isn't she going to use the dangerous wood acupoint to vomit blood and faint every 3 days or 2? The Tar tribe is strong and energetic. They can eat more meat and recover in less than the next day. However, although she practices martial arts all year round, she is just an ordinary person. If she didn't suffer from the short-lived Puliu disease but died from excessive blood loss, how could she get it? Anyway, let's go through this level first before we talk. With the intelligence and talent of my fiber storage instrument, will it be easy to drive him out of the mansion in the future? But the fiber storage device never expected this guy to be a sticky black fox. The fiber storage instrument's delicate jade hand touched the waist and exerted a force that made the bones ache. Suddenly, his face turned pale. The fiber storage instrument raised its hand again and touched the forehead, just as it was about to perform the next path. Wei Jin and Yen thought that she was going to faint from weakness, so they quickly raised their arms and supported her shoulder from behind. What's wrong? Miss Chu, isn't your willow disease going to happen again? Do you want me to help you walk? Wei Jinyan put down his hand and then switched to supporting the arm of the fiber storage instrument. How could Wei Jinyan be so infuriating with his handsome and humble young master like a white jade? Kachu fiber instrument saw his sincere expression on his face. Think it over. From hearing that he has been humiliated in the cold palace since he was young, it seems that it was only a kindness, not intentional, so it's better not to blame him in your heart. The fiber storage instrument tugged at Jin Yen's sleeve and gave her a glance, gesturing for her to support him. Miss, what's wrong with your eyes? Did you get a bug? Kujinian looked into the eyes of his young lady with a bewildered expression. Jin Yen, this silly girl, has never had a strong connection with herself. The fiber storage device gritted its teeth and looked at Jin Yen, saying, Jin Yen. Where did the insects come from this big winter? Miss, why do you keep blinking? Jin Yen was still confused. The fiber storage device squeezed out a few words from between the teeth and said, my eyes are cold. Blinking a few times can gather more temperature. Is that right? Even the servant blinked. Jin Yen really blinked. Immediately, she helplessly turned her head to look at Wei Jinyan and whispered softly, thank you very much for the help of the 7th prince. However, Xianyi and the 7th prince are different in gender, so it may not be appropriate to have the 7th prince help her. Let Xianyi's maidservants help Xianyi. The fiber storage instrument extended its arm to the elder on Yoshinori's side, and Yoshinori finally reached out to support the fiber storage instrument. Wei Jinyan had a sincere apology on his face and said, it's because Jinyan didn't consider it carefully. We will definitely pay attention next time. No, no, no. Wei Jinyan, he will only be more reckless next time. Walking to the door, the fiber storage device stopped. Pei Wu puzzled and said, General Chu, why did you stop? Why don't you go in? Chu Xianyi revealed her little daughter's ashamed face and said softly, although Xianyi had tied her hair for years and changed to men's clothing, after all, this is Xianyi's boudoir. Why don't we move to the main hall? Wei Jinyan chimed in and said, indeed, is it possible for other men to freely enter and exit the daughter's boudoir? As a result, Wei Jin and Yan frequently entered and exited the fiber storage device's chamber during the day and night, repeatedly. Pei Wu couldn't help but sigh in his heart. General Chu's way of speaking and temperament have really differed greatly since he fell ill. Previously, Miss Chu was handsome and not very harsh, but now she looks weak and boneless. I see the appearance of Youlian's youngest daughter. Yeah. It is also common for one's temperament to change drastically due to illness, such as the youngest son of Prime Minister Yuan, who has gone from being a genius to being foolish all day since he fell from a height and broke his head at the age of 9. Moreover, the person with willow disease has a full body strength like cotton willows. Walking is already difficult, and speaking is certainly powerless and uncomfortable. How can they compare with their previous excellent energy? Sigh. General Chu is really pitiful, he's suffering from such a strange illness. Chu Xianyi Gui walked quickly on the main road, while Pei Wu ate fast, rode fast, and walked fast. He had no choice but to walk forward, back, and forth. The heart of the fiber storage device is full of thoughts. There are 6 places to point at the critical wood acupoint, including the waist, forehead, neck and shoulder, wrist, palm, and acupoint. It should be done in one go, otherwise it will have to start all over again. As soon as the storage fiber instrument woke up, before opening the door, she knew that the Crown Prince was coming to see her off. Ji Nian also told her that the Crown Prince was coming, so before pushing open the door, she prepared in advance and completed the critical wood acupoint technique. But now, in front of many people, performing these strange movements, Wei Jinyan wouldn't think she was feeling unwell again, and if she had to vomit blood and faint due to purulent willow disease, could she reach out and help her in time? But now we're about to reach the main hall. Got it. Universal stomach pain needs to go to the restroom. The storage fiber instrument quickly covered her stomach, frowned, and said in a weak voice, Xian Yi suddenly felt pain in her stomach. Rong Xian Yi went to the restroom first. Can you wait for Xian Yi here? At this moment, Wei Jinyan suddenly exclaimed in shock, Miss Chu has a stomachache. This is a sign of the worsening of Puliu syndrome. What? Dr. Zhang also exclaimed in surprise, then quickly helped Miss Chu sit down and let the 7th prince see how the situation is for General Chu. What? Is that right? At this moment, the fiber storage device suffering from willow disease was weak and boneless, and should not have exerted any strength. Therefore, she was forcefully supported onto the seat by a few people. Wei Jinyan raised his hand and attached her wrist. End of this chapter.